Hello everyone, and welcome to Business Disability Forum's weekly COVID-19 webinar, which we're offering as a free resource during these changing times. So I'm Lucy Ruck, I'm the Taskforce Manager, Business Disability Forum, and I'm delighted to be your host for today. Actually quite appropriate because we're talking about home working, and I've been a home worker for 6 years, so this isn't necessarily new to me, but I know the scale at which we're doing this is something that I don't think any of us have really experienced before. I wanted to draw your attention to the fact we do have closed captions available for today's meeting, and they're provided by our friends at MyClearText. You can choose this by clicking on the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen next to the chat option. If you need to adjust the caption size, click on the arrow next to the stop start video and you can choose video settings. If you click into accessibility, you'll find how to tweak and sort these things out from there, which would be great. If you do have any technical queries or anything you do want a bit of support with during the webinar, if you could just put these in the chat and our colleague will help you out with those. Also, we'll be asking questions from our audience at the end of the session. So if you think of anything as we're chatting along, if you want to post those in the Q&A, that would be great. So as I've already touched upon, our subject for this morning is managing remotely. Something we're getting asked about quite a lot, which many of our members are now grappling with, perhaps sometimes for the first time. Although lots of organisations have already embraced remote working, it's fair to say they've never done so on the scale or at such a pace. I think the speed of this has been quite remarkable. And for others, it's a whole new experience, a brave new world. So I'm delighted to be joined by two guests today who have already enormous experience in managing teams remotely. We have Warren Buckley, Global Head of Channel Optimisation and Contact Centres at HSBC, and Tim Jarman, Assistant Director of Diversity and Inclusiveness at EY. Hello, and thank you ever so much for joining us today. I wondered if you could just give us some quick intros about what you do. Maybe Warren, if I start with you, because I know you're here with sort of a couple of hats on really, aren't you, in terms of your role. So if you could tell us a little bit about what remote management means for you, that would be really interesting.
Lucy, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to join you today. So I have the opportunity to get a perspective from two roles that I have. One with HSBC, where I lead our contact centres globally. So we have just over 20,000 people across 24 countries around the world, all the way from Australia to the UK, and all the way from China through to Mexico. So quite a significant global spread. And in addition, I have the privilege of being the chair of Citizen Advice for England and Wales. And clearly from both of those perspectives, we've had to consider home working. On a personal level, like you, I'm quite used to working from home. When I'm not traveling around the world, I try to base myself at home, so I see a little bit of my family, but certainly never had as long a period of working from home as Liz. And that's taken some adjustment and some thought, and particularly about the boundaries that you need to set on a personal level. It's very easy to kind of work for every hour of the day other than when you're asleep if you're not careful. From a HSBC point of view, we've been through a very rapid move. Obviously, normally contact centres by and large are people based from large offices around the world. So over a 3-week period, we had to move all of our people to working from home. So we currently have 17,500 people now working from home. And obviously, actually, you need to consider that from quite a different level. It's not necessarily the same. Me working from home, holding meetings, leading a team is not the same as one of our frontline colleagues who perhaps is taking 40 to 50 calls a day, the pressure of that, of dealing and doing the right thing and serving customers. You really have to think, hang on, this is not me working in that environment. Actually, it's them, and what's the different aspects we need to do there. And then from a systems advice point of view, we've had to move our paid team and our volunteers. So we've had to move over 22,000 people to working from home. And obviously, everyone, I'm sure, certainly listening to a Business Disability Forum call will understand that, when you're working in a charity environment or when you're supporting people and that, being sensitive to the difference of volunteers again. So I think my one big takeout from this point of view, just as an introduction, would be the important thing is to think about the individual and not just assume that working from home or home working is the same for everybody.
Thank you, Warren. We'll come back to some of this. I will come to you next, Tim, but I also forgot to introduce my colleague, Bella Gore, who's here as contingency and backup. The joys of working from home. We never know when broadband might fail. And just she's also going to assist us with some questions from the audience, from the virtual audience as well later on. So thank you, Bella, for joining. Tim, could you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on what that sort of remote management looks like and your experience?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lucy, and hi, everybody. So I'm a member of the, as you know, from the diversity and inclusiveness team at EY, and whereas we are not, as a team, responsible for managing all of the remote working that the firm does, we are definitely there to be that voice of sense checking people's interactions and just making sure that people are aware of the sorts of things they need to be mindful of when they're working remotely and managing remote teams. So at EY, I mean, as with many organisations, speaking from the UK point of view, we pivoted from a large, mostly working in the office culture, although we have before this started, we had a very good flexible working culture of enabling our people to really have control of like when, where, and how they worked. But we were still largely office-based organisation, and we pivoted within 24 hours to a 100% home working organisation. Which has been a challenge, as you can imagine, but it's something that, given the technology that we're lucky to have, we've been able to do. I think echoing, a lot of the things that Warren has just said, and as you said, we'll touch on them in more detail a bit later. It's fine that we are, we're all going through this together in the sense that we're all going through the same situation together, but people really need to be mindful of the fact that people's experiences of this are going to be very, very different depending on their personal situation. And there are a whole multitude of different personal situations out there. There's not just one cookie cutter mold of what working from home looks like for everybody. And so, we're doing a lot of work at EY, making sure that we are making our people aware of that and making sure that they are being more mindful of the different experiences people are facing in this situation. Because if everybody, particularly the people who are in those more advantageous positions, forget that, quite easily, people can fall through the cracks, and people who are having a more negative experience of the situation can be sidelined. So, so that's something we're really focusing on a lot, but we'll be touching on that a little bit more later.
Yeah, I know you've both been managing your colleagues remotely for quite a while, but what have you noticed have been the biggest changes now with COVID-19, and what's better and maybe what's worse? Anyone want to start us off? Tim? Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I think one of the things that we've noticed is that, obviously, and I'm sure others will have noticed this too, that in the interactions that we have with our teams, given the current situation and the fact that we're doing everything virtually, it's very easy to continue having those interactions with your teams and with your immediate circle of contacts and the people you know the most and you have to interact with the most. But that additional circle of people that you have interactions with during the day when you're in the office or in the kind of more normal times sort of drops away to a degree. So it's much easier for people to stay within their insider groups and stay connected to their insider groups and only connect with those people that they like, or those people that they really want to have the connections with. It's more difficult for people, or we see that the connections with people beyond that, it's easier for those connections to drop away. So that's something that we need to be mindful of. Those little interactions that you have, if you're in the office, that you might bump into people in the kitchen when you're getting a drink, or you might just walking around the office. Those things have slipped away because of the virtual working. And so it's important to be more purposeful with making those connections outside of your teams and with those people that you wouldn't necessarily interact with every day, but that it's important to stay connected with. So that's something that we've noticed has happened. And for an organization like EY, that personal network and building and maintaining that personal network is a really important part of life at the firm, particularly for people like myself in our support functions, where it's really good to know people in all different parts of the business, because it helps you get things done. It helps you know who to talk to when you want to connect on a particular issue that you might not deal with on a day-to-day basis. And it just helps have that real breadth of experience and that breadth of challenge on what you're doing, and you know, those different perspectives that if you just sit within your comfort zone and just stay within your insider group, you're not going to get necessarily.
Thank you. Warren, what's your thoughts? So what's been different, better or worse?
I think from the point of view of working with my leadership team, one of the things that's been really key is to agree some structure and regular check-ins. A bit like Tim says, is we're not bumping into each other in the office. About my team work in many different offices, but you still have that sense that you can reach out on that basis. So I think you need to have that structure. The structure is not only important to make sure you do have those regular conversations, but to respect the different situations that people are in. You know, actually, for some of my colleagues who have younger children and family and responsibilities there, you know, in the past where we might have had a catch up at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's a pretty chaotic point of the day for many of them. So a catch up mid morning on a regular basis makes a much more sense, feels that we're adapting around them. So I think, you know, thinking about those catch up, the structure in terms of the individuals, the way they're working, be sensitive to that. To be flexible, because the reality is, you know, what felt like the right approach on day one of working from home and you know, in the lockdown period, actually I think we had to really go through a process of adjusting after about 10 days, because we'd all learned a little bit differently about what worked, what didn't work around that basis. One of the things we didn't find was working was there was almost that sense someone was always available. You know, I'll just WhatsApp them or I'll just chat them that. Actually, they're not, because in that environment, people are balancing a lot of different things in their home life as well, and also just trying to find some space for themselves as well with what has been a very busy time. So I think that ability to be flexible as well. I think when you're leading operational teams, so you know, rather than management levels, leadership levels, but more at that level, is that real sensitivity to understand that many of those teams are used to working with offices, and therefore, for example, if somebody on a customer service role has a question, normally they could reach out, look for their manager, the manager can walk over, have a chat, something comes up, they can have a quick team huddle. We're all used to working on that basis, particularly in operational world. That works completely differently, and if I'm open with you, in the first probably week or so of that, where we had a big scale environment of doing that, we lost a little bit of that sensitivity to making sure that we were checking in with people, that we were available to people. And there's a real sense, I think, in that environment, somebody who goes perhaps from working in an office of 200-300 people, and a sense of isolation, the sense of being a distant, the sense of not having somebody to help. So things like using some more modern environments, where that to using, you know, instant messaging facilities where people could call out. Well, suddenly then your managers need to not just be available walking around. So we've actually created some new help desks. So actually we've got some managers and help desks allocated in that environment, reach out on instant messaging. And obviously there are many different instant messaging platforms, so I'm not going to pick one, but reaching out on that basis so that people feel there are people available to them on that basis. Also in that environment, of course, there's you know, when you're in an office, there's things like simple things like IT support. So we identified early on, actually, to keep our team able to work and function in that environment, we had to create another IT help desk with different skills and that approach, so we could get people back on working on that basis. So I think, you know, for us, it's really been learning as we've gone through that environment, responding. And then the last thing, which I would say is as true in the office as it is from a working at home environment, but easy to forget, is listening. You know, really, you know, one of the key things I think we all learn, really listening to the individuals in those circumstances and being willing to adapt on that basis. So my biggest takeout is probably a willingness to kind of adapt on an ongoing basis and not assume that just because something worked yesterday, it will carry on working.
I think for me, one of the things that's been really interesting as a remote worker all the time is these virtual meetings. So we're all using Team or Zoom or these video conferencing platforms to talk to each other. And what's really nice is I'm not the bolt-on dialing into the people in the meeting room. Everyone's in the same situation, or relatively. Slightly caveat that, but you know, everyone is connecting up on an even playing field, and that's really nice from a remote worker perspective. I think things like that are really nice to think about in terms of going forward. The other thing, Warren, I was going to ask you about was Citizens Advice Bureau. Now, working with volunteers and people working remotely is a whole nother challenge again, I would assume.
Yes, I mean, that's certainly true. I mean, the first thing to say, in an extraordinary way, we've had many more people for the first time in coming to us wanting to volunteer. I mean, I say that because, you know, it's easy to feel quite challenged and negative in this current environment. We're all under a lot of pressure and worrying about kind of loved ones, friends and family. But we've actually been, you know, had lots of new volunteers coming to us wanting to help in that environment. Obviously, we've had to close all of our offices like everyone else. So we've closed all our offices, so our face-to-face work is not something we can pursue. But we've actually then had to train up lots of people to support on phone, on chat, on those different environments as well. I mean, clearly, when you're working with a volunteer workforce, you need to be really sensitive to the fact that they are volunteering. You know, there's a subtle but really important difference in terms of the ask that you make with people. I think in that situation, the fact that not everyone necessarily is set up to be able to work from home. You know, on that basis, particularly again with a volunteer environment, to be sensitive around that piece. Probably the most important thing though is not assuming that volunteers don't want to carry on working and doing what they were doing for you before when you move on that environment. And I think actually for us there could have been an easy focus that our paid employees, as part of Systems Advice, yes, we'd focus on them, but actually we had many volunteers going saying, look, I want to help, how do you help, can I train on this, can I take phone calls, from that point of view. So I think from that, of course, the sensitivity, it comes back to the individuals, but not assuming that actually people just want to sit at home because they don't want to do anything. Actually, people, I think, want to be busy during this period. They want to make a contribution. And there's a real opportunity for lots of charities that rely upon volunteers, I think, to work out how you make that happen, and not to assume that just because somebody, for example, of us, was trained mainly on face-to-face, they wouldn't be able to take calls. So within days, we had 800 people saying volunteering to take telephone calls that had not been taking telephone calls before on that basis. I think the other thing I would say for Systems Advice and for HSBC that you will need to be sensitive to in this period, and I think this is true of a working from home or not, but the isolation point I think is important, is clearly in that environment, and many people involved in BDF will be in the same. It's pretty challenging time to be in customer service environments. You know, many of my teams in HSBC are taking calls from people who have lost loved ones and we're having to deal with bereavement. Many of the work that we're doing in Systems Advice is dealing with people who've seen their whole lives change, not in months, but in 24 hours. You know, so actually really considering about how do you give support to people who are in real frontline roles, often isolated from the normal support environment, but in addition, dealing with incredibly difficult conversations with people who need the help and the support, so we have to give it. But I think actually creating the space for people, the opportunity for people to share how they're feeling, like on services such as Zoom or Teams or something, because I think the face-to-face makes a kind of huge difference on video. But that extra sensitivity, that what we're asking people to do in these times when they're customer or client facing, is pretty challenging and difficult.
Yeah, I know you were talking the other day, Warren, about the different cultures and people working from home, and those home environments can be quite difficult for people, or quite challenging, but they're really trying to make the most of it and are really pleased with what they've been able to achieve as well.
Yeah, no, it's a good example. One of the things I love about kind of the fact that I have a role that involves many countries around the world is that you see those different cultural environments. And our home working started in China. Obviously, we've got quite a big team as a bank in China, so we saw that really early. And in China, the broadband is fantastic. People tend to live in slightly bigger environments than in some countries, but still quite restricted, and we have to be sensitive on that. When you go to countries such as the Philippines and India and Malaysia and Egypt and others, much more extended family environments. So, you know, not just perhaps our UK kind of 2+1 family environment, as we'd often find, but many extended family environments, often people sharing rooms. And therefore working in different environments. So being sensitive to the fact that maybe somebody working from home has put a desk together, their chair is really the end of their bed. They've created a private area maybe with a curtain. So real sensitivities and recognizing the work somebody's put into that. Again, you just can't assume the same situation for everybody on that. Another quick example, in Malta, where we have a team, we have a couple of husbands and wives. They're both working from home. So we've had to think about actually shift patterns because they don't have lots of space. So actually one working from home when the other is off, but then being sensitive to the fact they still want to spend time together. So lots and lots of different, it really comes back to my earlier point of, you have to think about every individual and the circumstances they're in, and then the culture is one part of that.
Thank you, Warren. What do people on this webinar need to think about differently when managing remotely? Because it is quite a different skill, isn't it, in terms of managing people in the same building as you. Tim, can I come to you on that? I know we were talking a bit about sort of mindfulness and thinking about those interactions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Warren's touched on some of these and what he's just said. But some of the work that we've been doing, as I said earlier, is around really challenging people and making people aware of these things. So, some of those things. So, particularly the people in different situations that we've talked about, like on the call already. In that, the majority of the people that are in those decision-making positions, deciding how we all exit this situation when the government starts relaxing lockdown, for example, the majority of those people are going to be in quite privileged positions in general, perhaps with larger houses than most of us, potentially with a study where they can set up their home working setup, which might be significantly better than the working setup that they have in the office, because they get to choose what they buy rather than the standard stuff that the company provides. And it's really, really important, particularly for those people, to be really cognizant of the fact that for the vast majority of the people in the organization, that is not going to be the setup that they have. And that for many people, working from home long term is simply not viable and is not practical. For many people it will be, but for a lot of people it won't be. We have to do it now because we have no choice. We can't because of the government guidelines. But there are many people who are in situations, for example, there might be a younger member of staff who might be in a flat share with 4 other people all working from home at the same time, sharing a kitchen table or something. Or as Warren's mentioned, maybe working in their bedroom or something to have that extra level of privacy. You may have, you've got many parents who obviously have kids at home all the time. Lucy, you'll recognize this, that many of my colleagues do as well, where the kids are at home all the time. They have to manage that as well as working as well, so they've got that to deal with. You might have people from different demographics who are in challenging situations. So we may have LGBT people, for example, who are not out at home but are out in the office, and the office is their safe space to be themselves, and now that's been denied them. So they might be finding it very difficult at home, having to hide who they are from their family and not really having the outlet apart from through virtual interactions. And then obviously, as we all know through the work that you do at BDF, there are people with various different abilities who are being impacted in a disproportionate way as well. So I think that's one of the first things that we're saying to people, is to be really mindful of the fact that this isn't the great leveler that we often hear. We're not all going through this equally together. Technically, we're all going through it together because we have to, but our experiences are going to be very different. So it's to be mindful of that. And then use of language as well. So often, we hear this, from people who have, mental health issues. I mean, myself included, this, the language of this being the new normal, and this feeling of indefiniteness that exists with the current lockdown can be quite damaging to people. So people being mindful of the language they use, not referring to this current situation as the new normal. The new normal is going to be what we build afterwards. What's the working world going to look like after the COVID-19 situation? It's not right now. Now is a temporary situation. It may, it will be lifted gradually, but it's a temporary situation, and the new normal is what we move to. So it's about focusing more on that, and also not using flippant language like we're in this for the long haul, and it's going to be a long time before we get back, because that means different things to different people. Different people will interpret those lengths of time, and that can be damaging to people's mental health as well. So just being mindful of the sorts of language that people are using. And then in virtual calls, as I touched on earlier, and and Lauren's mentioned as well, this importance of checking in, making sure that everybody in your team is checked on, and just to make sure that they're doing okay, because it's so easy for people who might be introverted or quiet, or not really wanting to interact actively with the team all the time, to slip through the cracks. Or there might be people who you might talk to them, or they might be talked to in the office because they're there, and people might include them in conversations because they're there. But when they're not there, are they being included as well? And so those people need to be checked in as well. So some of the tips that we give to our people include, making sure that, challenging people in your team to check in, every week, check in with at least one person that you don't normally check in with, that you wouldn't normally talk to on a day-to-day basis. Just give them a call, see how they are. Or to subdivide, if you're in a large team, subdivide your team into smaller pod groups or something, and just give one person in that group the responsibility to just make sure that everybody in that group has been checked in with and is okay, just to make sure that they, everyone is being looked after and has that opportunity to tell people how they feel. But then I think with all of this virtual, this virtual working and the video calling, for many people, they might be introverted, they might be in a less advantageous background and not want to necessarily display that on a computer screen, or might just be a private person and not really want to display their home to their colleagues. People shouldn't feel that they have to go on video every time that a video call is happened. They shouldn't be called out for not being on video, or your camera's not switched on, I can't see you. There are specific situations where that is okay. So if you're talking to someone who might have a hearing impairment, and so lip reading might be something that they need to be able to communicate, etc., that's okay. I think that's fine for people in those situations to say, look, it will make this call go a lot easier if I can see you, because I need to read your lips, where closed captioning might not be available automatically. But in general, people should just be mindful that if someone's chosen not to switch their camera on, that should in general be respected. That's their choice. It shouldn't be called out. Just start the call as you would normally, and that should be fine. So I think there's these things that we need to be mindful of when we're shifting to this completely virtual environment, and just making sure that people don't feel that they're under pressure, or that they're being put under pressure to act or be in any particular way. Just because of the change in the situation. So those are a few of the things that we are talking about with our people, just to try and make them a bit more mindful of those interactions in this current situation.
I think there's some nice technical options you can do. So if people are aware of their background, I'm aware I'm sat in front of a door, don't worry, I've put the lock on so the children can't barge in, we should be fine, although I just heard one outside. You can blur backgrounds with a lot of these things, or put like a virtual background on. Now, they can be quite distracting at times, I have to admit, and some work better than others. But I think for people who are self-conscious about what's in the background, or they have got other people around, then that's a perfectly good middle ground maybe for some people that might work. And actually it was developed, Microsoft's version was developed for someone who found backgrounds very distracting. So that's how and why they developed that. I will come to you next, Warren. I was just going to say, people listening in, if you do have any questions for us, please do come to us and let us know what your thoughts are, or what issues you might have been having. You maybe like some input. Warren, as well, I was going to ask you about the not making assumptions and treating everyone differently. Was there anything you wanted to add around that from your expertise?
Maybe just build a couple of points on Tim's points as well around that, and I'll give an example. I think the video one is a really good example, because the other day I was on a call where one of my colleagues was going to add something, kind of was planned as part of a piece I was leading on, and I'd noticed that she wasn't on video, and so I just was able to chat to her, ping her a note just saying, is everything okay, you okay? She said, oh yeah, no, I'll be on a video in a minute, I'm just giving the children their lunch. Before I come in, I'll need about 15 minutes. And that's just that reminder, and I hate to say it, but certainly, that slightly old-fashioned stereotypes seem to have been reinforced in this period, because I can pretty much guarantee it's all of the women on my team that seem to be always giving lunch and dinner during calls, and not their husbands. But I think actually just being centered on that. A few points on video, and this was a piece of advice given to me quite early on, was to get really comfortable with the tool you're using. So most of us are using one tool most of the time. So I spend about 10 hours a day on Zoom. Zoom is the piece. Now and again on Teams, on others with other externals. But I think there are lots of different tools that you can become comfortable in signals. So one of the things I think when you're face-to-face is we become used to other signals. So somebody gave some advice. So yesterday, for example, I was chairing a systems device board meeting. And normally we have a free-flowing conversation when we're in a meeting and such like, and I want to try and retain that. So using some of the tools on different things of understanding when people have got something they want to say. Some people will just drop a chat on to say they've got a question. Some people will wave, and so you're trying to track across to wave. Some people, I've noticed very interestingly, take themselves off mute, ready to talk. And you can see that on Zoom. So you can see that they're coming off on that basis. But the other piece, which is really important, is who are the people who are not talking? Because actually you find some people who are quite vocal in a physical environment are not as vocal on a video environment. And therefore, rather than making that assumption that, for example, in that setting yesterday, that one of the individuals, I was thinking to myself, well, they normally have quite a lot to say, or maybe, actually I brought them into a conversation. They were much more comfortable because I brought them in. Another colleague on that board, who's often quite quiet and I have to bring in a physical environment, much more vocal on a video environment. So I think not just assuming that people act in the same way face to face. It's easy to say face to face, but the difference between face to face on video is not the same as in a physical environment. So I think a lot of the points completely endorse and see what Tim means in that environment. I think the third thing to identify around that is that the fact actually, people's home situations are very different. So one of the things I did quite early on with my team was have a very open conversation with them and say, what are the things you just want me to consider? And it's up to you what you share with me or not, of course, but what are some of the different things that you want me to consider and to be aware of on that environment? It's just much more obvious of some of that stuff when you're face to face in an office and meeting people on that. But I have a little list here. It's always on the list of the 12 people on my team, and little kind of notes of things they've just asked me to consider. And once or twice people have come to me and said, oh no, I'm okay on that now. You don't need to consider that now on that. But that's been very useful in that environment. So I think really getting comfortable with the tools that you're using and making the best of them and considering how they work for different individuals. For me, it was a really good piece of advice I was given. It's made quite a big difference. Hopefully, you'd have to ask the people I'm working with probably, but hopefully made a difference in my ability to work in that environment.
Thank you, Warren. And going to move on to another question now. So Business Disability Forum have developed a people manager guides on performance management. We talk about focusing on outputs and outcomes quite a lot. So what someone needs to do rather than how they go about doing it. And we think this is probably especially important in remote management, where relying on someone being at their desk as a measure of whether or not they are working. And I think home workers, and I know I suffer from this, I feel I have to be like strapped to my computer. And if I miss a phone call, I'm very apologetic because I went to the loo or I made a cup of coffee. Actually, I would do those things if I'm in office, but there is a certain amount of guilt. And then because you think you're being checked up on, not that you are, but it's an interesting one. Any thoughts around that? Who wants to go first? Tim, did you want to talk about that? How we manage that?
Yeah, I think it's a good it's a good one because I think we all in our minds kind of when we're trying to contact somebody and they don't, there is that all of us I think are guilty of it, but there's that little bit of, well, they're at home. I know they're at home. Why are they not answering? But I think we all have to challenge ourselves on that and just be like, yeah, they're at home. Trying to balance all these different things. We shouldn't just expect people, just because we know everybody's working from home, to suddenly pick up immediately. You don't know what they're, they might be in another call or they might be doing something else. They might just be taking, a short break or something just to help them manage getting through all of this. So I think there is that kind of personal sense check that we have to do on that, and not just expect that just because we know that we're all working from home, that we're all just going to be immediately available all the time. Sometimes people, and it's perfectly fine, people need during their day, I think, even more so at the moment, to be able to take regular breaks and just do the things that, as you say, that you would normally do in the office, like, go and grab a coffee or a tea or something or whatever. People should continue doing those sorts of things, and they need to take regular breaks to help, with their mental health going through this situation. So I think it's more a personal sense check, and another thing of, making sure people are being mindful is that, we just need to make sure that we're not expecting people to just be on call all the time, 24/7. And Warren touched on it earlier as well, that sense of structure as well in the day. So I think it's, people need to set some boundaries, because obviously it's very easy for everything to just merge together into one just big day. And people might think it's okay to contact people after the end of the workday because, well, they're at home, so we know that they're there. But I think it's important for people to set some boundaries. So after a certain time, that's my finish time. Particularly during the current situation, this is my finish time. Barring emergencies or whatever, that's my time, and I'm switching everything off. And I won't be available until I log on the next day, and making sure that there is that boundary, and just keep reiterating and reinforcing that the points that you've already raised around the focus on the outputs. Is the work that they're doing good? Is it pleasing the clients that they're working for? Is it are they delivering to the standard that you would expect them to deliver on? If yes, well, it's fine for them to manage their day and be a bit flexible during the day. If the output is what you're expecting or what you're looking for, and it's pleasing you and your clients and customers.
Yeah, I also think there's something interesting around ergonomics as well, as we've already touched upon in a number of these webinars. People are often doing a makeshift kind of desk and whatever. Actually, it's more important they get up and stretch and move around and go and get a drink or whatever, because you cannot sit on your sofa with your laptop on your lap, because it's just not good for you, is it? So actually it's probably more important than ever, because it's not a proper home working setup. This is a bit of a ad hoc trying to do best we can to try and flex around things.
And one tip that I would just add from a boundary point of view that I've personally found quite useful is that for those of us that do go into the office all the time and commute, that commute is an important buffer. It's an important signal that that's the workday's finished. Now I'm transitioning into non-work, and obviously we don't have that in home. It just merges together. So one thing I found quite useful myself is in my diary, each day I block my end time and I put a 45-minute virtual commute in my diary, and that's my time that I shut everything off and I will go into another room away from my husband and I will read my book like I would on the tube. And I find it really useful in providing a buffer between work and non-work, and also because that's what I would do in the normal working situation. It helps my mind unwind as well, because that would be my mind's signal. This is my me time. I'm reading my book, and then I'll be at home. So it kind of helps me get into that non-working mindset as well. So something like that, providing us an actual buffer that you just go and do something that you might do on whether it's reading or whatever that you might do on your commute, or you just go and do something totally different just to provide that buffer between work and non-work. I found useful anyway.
Absolutely. Warren, what were your thoughts on the performance management and how we deal with that at the moment?
I think the outcomes point is spot on. I mean, I think the first thing around all of this is there's a strong element where you're a people leader or manager of a shadow of the leader, kind of around this environment. We talk about it quite often in the past, but taking the point that there's no point saying to everyone, I want you to put some boundaries in, and you're still sending emails any time of the day, because there's just that pressure for people then to respond however much you said to them. So I was very clear with my team, my boundaries quite early on. It was also useful for me to be clear and set some expectations with my family that what that structure was. So it's worth both ways. I'm sure, Tim, with your husband around, the same setting that. So I've had to say to my wife at certain times, that actually these are the hours I'm going to be working. I'm very fortunate. I kind of, my office is a little bit away from the house, taking Tim's point on privilege, which I think is extremely well made. So I think the first one, the outcomes, you have to, the shadow of the leader, be very clear on what you're doing, where you're doing, and really think through the actions that you take. Saying to everyone, look, turn off an email on that basis, but then sending them WhatsApps is probably not helpful. So I think there's an element of that. I think from an outcome point of view, I think it does vary a little bit between the type of people and the teams that you're leading on. Certainly with my team, extending out in that environment, the approach I would normally take is agree very, very clear objectives and timeframes and quality levels, and then trusting the team to work on that basis. And I think during this period, maintaining that environment where, certainly with my team, my view is having agreed what those outcomes, the objectives, and that approach is, my role moves to being support. My role is to help with removing barriers or dealing sometimes with company politics or different elements like that. There's a temptation when you're home to go, oh, I've got 10 minutes. How are they doing on this? And it becomes an email, but that email starts to undo everything you've built up in terms of trusting your team to kind of deliver outcomes. You'll appreciate, I think, when you're dealing with customer facing teams at a volume level, you can't just leave that to the outcome. So I can't say to everybody in the front line of the contact centers, you work out how to do that job, because there's a whole set of regulatory rules and legal environments and everything we have to work to on that in that environment. So actually it's about having consistent inputs that we're confident that if people deliver the outputs, it will deliver the outcomes, but being very clear with people on that basis. I'll just give one quick example though of, you know, at the front line being sensitive around that piece when you do. So we identified quite early on, we couldn't work out why in India we were seeing people drop off on being available at certain times of the day. And we hadn't seen this before. And so we did a whole set of work of listening, of going out to our teams and asking. We identified in India, lots of people eat as a family. When the younger members of the family who worked for us were in the office working, that was fine. They accept, but actually there was an expectation when they were home, between this hour and a half period, they would have dinner. And so actually the initial reaction was, well, they're going to have to work. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to work. This is pretty deeply cultural from that point of view. So we've shifted our work patterns so to allow people to actually have those family meals and eat with their family. And we've had an incredibly positive feedback around that. So I think, you know, even in that environment, we know what the outcomes that we want are, okay? But we need to be sensitive to the situation people in to help them to achieve those outcomes. That can't be just the pressure on them. It has to also be about the environment you're creating for them to work.
It's that manager's mind shift as well, isn't it? Because you get stuck in a rut of going, but that's the way we've always done it, which is like real cliche management, isn't it? But you do have to kind of adjust to thinking about things in a different way. Well, why does it matter? Could we do something? Call centers, that's going to be slightly different, because there are going to be times you need to make sure you've got cover. But yeah, it's good to be flexible about it.
I think again about the shadow leader is that environment of challenging, saying, you know, often as a leader, if you take a management role, you can go, this is the way we've done things, and you reinforce. So being much more open-minded to actually say, look, how could we adjust? Could we do something differently? Let's not do what we've already done. Let's do something that's right for this environment. If you don't do that, there's a pretty high chance none of your team will either.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to move on a little bit and thinking about, we've got a COVID-19 toolkit that we've developed at Business Disability Forum. And one of the things is, how do you spot the signs that someone isn't coping, for example? And do you have any advice around that? Because that can be quite challenging remotely. It's not the same as bumping into someone in the office. Who would like to lead me off on that? Tim's unmuted himself. That's one of my digital signals. Go, Tim.
Well, I think, you know, touching on, you know, what me and Warren have both touched on during the call, that checking in piece, that if you spot that there is, you know, it's something that, you know, a leader should make, and team members, but, you know, particularly the leader of a team should be, you know, sense checking, you know, are there people who are being particularly quiet and, you know, aren't interacting, or have sort of dropped off and, you know, haven't interacted with the team for a while, you know, making sure that you're you know, touching base with them and being like, are you okay? Like, is everything fine? Like, we haven't heard from you for a bit, and I just want to make sure that you're okay, because that can often be a sign if people just, you know, drop off the radar and just, you know, just quietly just don't interact. So I think making sure that you're being mindful of that, and you're checking that, you know, is everybody there. But also, you know, it's great to you know, to hear what, you know, the openness that Warren has shown with his team, because I think that's an important thing, is as a leader of a team, is making sure that you're available and making sure that everybody in the team knows that you're there for them, and that if they have any issues, or that they have anything that they you know, problems that they've got dealing with the situation or whatever, that you're there, and that they can come to you confidentially, they can come to you quietly, you know, and have that conversation with you, and you're always open, you know, you want them to come to you, because, you know, if you don't know, you know, if you don't know that they're going through something, you can't do anything to help them. So I think that openness is really important, and you know, beyond teams as well, making sure that there are other channels that people know, you know where they are, know how they can utilize them, you know, with the broader organization. If they want to talk to, you know, an employee assistance program, or they want to, you know, they need to talk to HR about something, just reminding people that there are all these other channels that they can use as well outside of their team, if they don't want to have those conversations in their team. But I think that it's kind of a responsibility of everybody on a team, particularly the leader, to be mindful of keeping an eye on the well-being of the team and making sure that you're aware where there might be issues going on.
Yeah, and I think that ask twice, don't, if someone goes, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine. Actually isn't often enough, is it? I was talking to my brother the other day, and interestingly, he works in a care home, which, as you can imagine, is a really challenging environment at the moment. And he was saying to me, I'm really struggling with it. My boss asked me how I was. I said, yeah, I'm fine. I said, well, you're not fine, are you? So you actually need to go back and say, do you know what? I'm really struggling with this. This is hard. And he did that, and his boss went, yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? And it's kind of brought things to another level. And I think if you can be open and honest, but actually it's a line manager's responsibility as well to just not take the first answer, because I think we all know, especially culturally in the UK, we're terrible. We go, yeah, it's fine, everything's fine. So sort of delving a little bit deeper maybe with those things. Warren, did you want to come in on that at all?
I think all the points you've both made are spot on. I think really there's a lot of signals that I think that we get in kind of, I guess, normal environments, kind of the pre-COVID environment, that still are very relevant. So I know with one of my team, normally the way I catch up with one of my team is, now and again, every few weeks, we'll go for a drink. And so actually, as of 2 weeks ago, with that member of my team, I've said, look, on a Friday afternoon, should we have a catch up over a beer, just the two of us and such like, and okay, Zoom and such like? We've had some very different conversations, kind of conversations we were having before from that point of view. Other people that I know like a more formal environment. So from those, I've kind of said, look, ping me an email with the things you want to go through, and that's what we go through. That's where they get their confidence from. I think that environment of, again, it comes a little, I'm a big believer in kind of shadow of the leader thinking that you have to demonstrate in order to get the kind of response. So I've trained myself to not just go, everything's fine, because, I am British, so kind of that is, everything's fine or nice or interesting. But but almost in that, when someone says, I say, well, this is the things I'm finding difficult, and this is what I'm working on. This was great. Really enjoyed that from that point of view. You do get a different response, I think, in that environment, and that you just have to, I think, be very clearly demonstrating those. You can't then force the response. Somebody then says, yeah, I'm fine. Oh, no, you sure? Yeah, I'm fine. Well, you just kind of, there's a point where you have to respect people's boundaries that people create in the way they deal with things. But I think the more open you're comfortable being, and not everyone will be, but the more comfortable you are in that environment, the more you put people at ease on that. So I think, again, it's all about those different signals and being receptive to those, even if it takes a little bit more thought in this environment than it does in an office environment.
Bella, I was going to come to you. Have we had any questions that you can put to us?
Well, there's a couple of things that can spring to mind, actually. Warren, going back to what you were saying about the CAB and working with volunteers, and I know that some of the listeners as well will be working with organisations that have furloughed staff, and those furloughed staff will be trying to volunteer as well elsewhere. But a thing that comes up is that at HSBC and at EY, you've got all sorts of support systems that you've mentioned for your staff, and the volunteers don't have those. And sometimes they don't even have a phone. They certainly don't have things like Office 365 or Word and Windows, and they're sort of giving advice at the CAB. And I confess, actually, I have a personal interest in this. My sister works for the CAB as well at the moment, and there are sort of tips as well about staying safe because you're using your personal phone maybe. And do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, no, certainly. I'd love to say this was a huge plan that we had, but we didn't. But we at Citizens Advice, we invested fairly heavily, and I'll talk about who we invested with, but appreciate the fact there were different tools you can use. For us, it was with Google. And part of the reason we went with Google was a big debate, was because they have a very good support environment for charities in terms of that, and we're obviously quite a scale. So we went significantly from a Google point of view. I think the sensitivity value maker of people using their own devices is spot on. So we have a whole technology team that have given support in that environment, and that enable people. We set up a help desk to give people more support because of course they need it in that environment. I think we have a whole safeguarding point. I think the point around safeguarding is really important. Clearly, often, we think more about safeguarding in a face-to-face environment, an office environment, or particularly a remote worker environment. And in Systems of Ice, we do have quite a lot of outreach services where we operate that. I think safeguarding as well, when you put in a video, so one of the things that we've been launching in a number of different environments is video support, to try and balance out the fact we haven't had face-to-faces do video support. You need safeguarding in a video environment. People can see you. Suddenly you're much more identified. They can look you up. People have concerns in the video environment, that actually of things like harassment and different things, elements like that. So you do need that extra safeguarding environment on that. I think the key for me, Bella, from a Systems of Ice point of view, has been really open with people about how it will work, what they would need to do, so people can make a decision. Now that should certainly apply for volunteers, but quite frankly, for the paid members of Systems of Ice as well, there has to be that willingness of, are you comfortable with this? Is this something that you want to do? I'd say the biggest takeout in that environment, though, is people have wanted to do something.
Yeah.
And actually, you're right. We've had many people who are on furlough who are volunteering for us for now. And I think, to be honest, one of the benefits of the furlough environment, although it has obviously some of its challenges as well, is that it doesn't prevent people doing other roles. And people want to be busy. Not everyone, but a lot of people want to be busy during this period.
No, I think that's really important as well. And things like and simple advice that people might not know if they're not very tech savvy as well, is things like you can hide your phone number if you are using your own mobile phone, and giving advice on things like hide your phone number, blur backgrounds you've mentioned already if you are using videos, make sure that you don't have photographs, and you don't sort of give away your street address and your kids and things like that in the background. So I think that's all really useful advice. Another question, actually, maybe this is one for you, Tim, is because you've talked about introverts and people. There's a lot of talk about catching up with everyone and making sure that everyone's fine, but there is a question here about what about the people who are feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the number of catch-ups? Is there a sort of a need to recognise that there's a pressure to feel that you've got to be available for all these people who want to know that you're all right and want to have coffee or a beer with you? No offence, Warren, I'd love to have a beer with you, but it's is being mindful of those people.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm one of those people, so I completely I can sympathise with that. It can, given the virtual situation, it can feel like, oh my gosh, there are so many people wanting to get in touch with me, I have to be available for everybody. And I think that there has to be like a line, either in your own head that you draw, or in the interactions that you have between those catch-ups, those check-ins that are coming from your team leader, just to do that regular check-in with the team, just to make sure that they know that the team is doing okay, and all of those other catch-ups that are coming from everywhere else. And I think that when it comes to the team catch-ups, I think those are really, really important at the moment, so that particularly your line manager and that knows that you're okay. It doesn't have to be a very long catch-up or anything. You can just be like, I'm okay, I'm fine, and genuinely I'm okay, it's all right. I think that you shouldn't feel that if you're in a situation where you're starting to feel pressured and you're starting to feel like it's getting too much, don't be frightened to say that to people. Don't be frightened to just say, look, I'd love to catch up with you, but I'm just, at the moment, I'm just feeling I've got a lot on, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, can I get back to you or something. I think that people should feel empowered to be able to do that. And organizations like what we're doing at EY with trying to make people be more mindful of that. That's part of the guidance that we give, is just that thing of be mindful of introverts and things as well, in that there will be people who don't want to be like bombarded with things, and give people and be open to people, give people that space and be open to people saying to you, look, I'll get in touch with you when I'm in a better place. So it's kind of a bit of both. The people who like myself, who are introverted, we should feel empowered to be able to say to people, it's great that you want to contact me and everything, but right now I'm just finding it a little bit overwhelming, so could you politely back off, and I'll get in touch with in touch with you when I'm feeling a bit better. But also, other people need to be a bit more mindful, and if you're interacting with people, you should generally, if they're people you should probably know a little, know whether they're introverted or not, and perhaps if you do have introverts in your circle of contacts and friends, just think about what the current situation might be doing to them.
Yeah,
and I think just to add, not everybody wants every news report or every new graph or every new update WhatsApp to them or email to them.
mm-hmm.
And certainly one of the things with a close colleague of mine, I've had to give some quite strong feedback of, no, look, we have this WhatsApp group which is meant to be about staying in touch and support and memory of Tuesdays, and 4 or 5 times a day you're sending an update from somewhere in the world that is quite depressing in that, and people are dealing with COVID differently. So from a personal point of view, other than what I need to know for work, I consciously touch in on what's happening in the UK and elsewhere once a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I get my information and news on that basis, because otherwise I just feel, and I'm not a natural introvert, I'm much more of an extrovert, but I just feel it just becomes overwhelming from that point of view. Other people want to look at it all the time, but just because you do doesn't mean everybody else does. So I think even around that piece, being sensitive to that, because it's not just about being overwhelmed by the work environment. I think it's about being overwhelmed by the wider situation, and everyone has to work out how to deal with that themselves, including the support they receive.
I think I completely agree with that, Warren. I mean, I am one of those people who is a bit of a data geek, so I do quite like keeping up to date with all of the stats and things. But you're completely right. For other people, that will cause huge levels of anxiety and things. So and it's not just sharing, people sharing data around. I think it's people speculating openly about what's going to happen. And it's fine, I think, if it's with your immediate friends and you're very you know each other and you're very kind of how each other think. But I think it's when you're in a broader team or you're in a on a bigger call or something, it's probably, you need to be very careful about speculating about lockdown restrictions relaxing, or or, oh my gosh, there might be a second wave and all that sort of thing, because we don't know, and that can cause huge levels of anxiety in people. If people might just probably do not want to be thinking about the immediate things that might be coming up on the horizon, they might just want to focus on the here and now, and that's their coping mechanism for getting through. So I think that's another thing to be mindful of on calls, is maybe not, and I'm sure we're all guilty of this to a degree at the moment, but really trying to be mindful of not spending the first 20 minutes of the call talking about COVID-19 and speculating about what's going to happen. I think try to put that aside if possible.
Yeah, I think that's really it's really important, and I think there's 2 related things I'll just mention very quickly. One is people saying that there's a lot of stuff sent in a well-meaning way about what to do with your lockdown time and how to stay healthy and happy and do yoga and all of these things. But some people are really busy, and they're getting tired. Comment here, of seeing, now that you've got all this time, I haven't got more time. I'm looking after the kids. I'm homeschooling. Work actually is busier. So that's coming through. And another one, a comment, Tim, talking about meetings and your buffer time for commute, and somebody is sort of making a plea really as well of when you've got Zoom meetings or Teams meetings, sometimes they're back to back, and when you've got a face-to-face meeting in an office, you're moving at least maybe from one room to another, or getting a coffee in between. So is you've got advice for scheduling meetings, or are you getting the back-to-backs as well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think we will all be getting those, and I think that's another thing that's again we're trying. I mean, first I'll touch on the first point about.
I'm really sorry, we're getting near the end of the hour, so can you just be super quick?
Okay. I would say think about scheduling your meetings so that they kind of finish 5 minutes before the hour or something, or try to schedule them maybe not on the hour or on the half hour, as we're all kind of conditioned to do, to give that kind of extra little buffer of time. To give people a chance to go and refill their water bottle, go to the toilet or whatever, just to have that little break between meetings. But also, people shouldn't feel pressured to do tons and tons of stuff during the lockdown. It's up to you how you deal with the lockdown in the best way that is for you. don't feel you have to write a novel or do whatever. You know, if that's not what you would normally do, don't do it. If it's going to add extra pressure, just get through the lockdown how you need to get through it and what's best for you in your situation.
Lovely, thank you, Tim. So I'm just going to round up very quickly now, just to say this webinar series was brought to you as part of our COVID-19 series. Thank you ever so much, everyone who's dialed in and joined us today. This will also be available on our website on Monday, so you can have it there, and it will have the captions as a part of that. If you enjoyed today's session, please head over to businessdisabilityforum.org.uk and find out more about our resources and services that we offer. And obviously, it goes without saying, a huge thank you to my guests, Warren Buckley and Tim Jarman, for joining us today. Really loving having a catch up with you and a bit of a chat, it sort of almost felt like. Our next topic is carers, and our guest is Julian John from Delcian, who will be talking about some of the issues around juggling caring responsibilities and working from home, which we've slightly touched on today, but obviously we'll go more into that. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much, and thanks for joining us. You take care.